Hello, good morning and good afternoon. I'm Alina Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you today following along for what is going to be a very interesting and exciting conversation with the Foreign Minister of Greece, Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias. Mr. Minister, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know you've had a lot of meetings during your time in Washington. You've had a very busy schedule. You have signed a new mutual defense cooperation agreement, a expansion of some of the previous agreements that Greece has had with the United States. There have been many discussions and dialogues on the broader strategic partnership between Greece and the United States as well. And I know we're going to get into all of that in just a moment. Minister Dendias has had prominent positions in the Greek government. This is your most recent post as foreign minister you've held since 2019, but previously you've had four positions in the cabinet, including as Minister of Defense, Development and Competitiveness, Minister of Public Order, as Citizen Protection, and the Minister of Justice, and you also serve in the Parliament since 2004. So, Mr. Minister, that's a very expansive portfolio that you've had over the years, and I'm really excited to talk to you today and to have you share your expertise with all of us here in Washington. So welcome again.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Please don't hold all those posts against me.
Well, let's just get right into it. You've had a lot of productive meetings. I already mentioned a expansion of the 5-year bilateral agreement on mutual defense and cooperation with the United States that's been part of the strategic partnership. This is, of course, of great interest to us here at SIPA because over the years we've been working to expand and highlight the work and developments happening in Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean more broadly in terms of regional security and defense, and to work to build greater alliance cohesion to understand how regional security issues affect the alliance and why the United States should continue to engage to cooperate with core allies like Greece in these regional security environments. So I wanted to perhaps start with the big development, which is the re-signing of the 5-year cooperation agreement. How do you see this MDCA fitting into the broader bilateral relationship between the United States and Greece in the years ahead?
Well, it is quite important because it shows that the two countries, Greece and the superpower, have a common reading of the situation in southeastern Mediterranean. And I have to say that it is even more important because the United States, because of the challenge presented to it by China, is really practically getting out mostly of Europe and of other regions around the world. So at the same time, when the United States is departing from Europe, it is expanding its presence in Greece. That for us is not only welcome because it creates stability in the region, it is welcome because we see that the Biden administration reads the situation in the region the same way as we do and believes as we do that the American presence is a stabilizing factor. It's a stabilizing factor for Greece, for Southeastern Europe, for the Balkans, and it will affect generally the overall situation in the Southeast Mediterranean.
Well, just to follow up on that, of course, Greece has been a really reliable and valuable NATO ally. You've had the 2% spending on defense for many years now, which many allies who shall remain unnamed have not been able to fulfill. And Greece has had the strategic partnership with the United States as well as the MDCA for some years now. But I want to turn it a little bit to another recent defense pact that your country signed with another European ally, that's of course France. So just recently, a new agreement between Greece and France now has Greece purchasing several, I believe it was 3 warships from France, expanding some broader cooperation, of course, working together on strategic autonomy. So how do you see this recent cooperation with France, the bilateral agreement with the United States in a more strategic context? How do these two fit together?
I think they're complementary, and both of them are complementary to our membership of NATO. Always Greece was trying and will be trying to create a common understanding on the questions and on the challenges in the overall region. And I have to say, our agreement with France, which, as you very rightly said, has two elements, and a defense agreement, and also, but at the same time, Greece acquiring a number of frigates from France, a very advanced weapon, by the way, shows that all those countries, the United States, Greece, the United States, but also other members of NATO, understand that the Southeast Mediterranean present a challenge for the cohesion of the NATO alliance, but also present a challenge to the European Union, present a challenge to other actors in the region like Egypt, like Israel, even beyond the immediate region, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, you name it, it is there. So we consider our agreements as stabilizing factors on these very volatile regions. And we think that the United States would think likewise, which is the case, and France would think likewise, which is the case, and the European Union will also see these things under the same angle, which we believe is the case as well.
So I mentioned the term strategic autonomy, and thank you for putting these agreements in a more strategic perspective. And we'll get to some of these regional issues that you've just outlined as well in the context of this discussion. But of course, this term strategic autonomy, I think, still is being defined in Europe. It's still being defined here in the United States as to how the United States should understand this vision of strategic autonomy that, France has obviously been in the forefront of this. How do you see strategic autonomy for Europe? What does it mean?
Yeah, it is nice to answer this question because, first of all, it's a Greek word. Autonomy is a Greek word. Second, I believe that sometimes it's perceived in the wrong way. Being Greek and knowing the word in its original form, I think we Greeks are best qualified to really understand what it means. Autonomy does not mean independent of the allies or independent of the other structures like NATO. Autonomy, I think the way it should be perceived, means adding an element which will allow Europe or will allow France and Greece to be complementary to NATO and be able to address certain challenges with NATO and cover NATO if NATO is not able to fulfill at one particular moment in time. So I see this understanding as complementary to the existing structure, not as being antagonistic to the existing structures. And by existing structure, I mean mainly NATO.
Well, I think that's very good to hear, certainly in Washington. But I want to pivot a little bit now to thinking more broadly about Europe's role in the world and how Greece sees Europe's role in the world, obviously as not just a NATO member, but a prominent member of the EU as well. And if we look at Europe today, I think what strikes me is that we're seeing this rise in instability on Europe's borders. One in Belarus, obviously, and of course we're still having conversations about the future of the Western Balkans. And I know you've been thinking a lot about the Balkans in particular, but I want to start with Belarus. You yourself and the Greek government has been quite vocal and quite active in expressing support for democracy. Obviously, Greece's history speaks to that, and for human rights in the context of the very repressive regime of Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. And I think in recent months, we've seen some really worrying trends. I mean, one clear one is the so-called weaponization of migrants by Belarus and the sending of potential refugees or potential asylum seekers across the border to the EU. And Greece, of course, has had a lot of experience dealing with these kinds of issues in the past and in different contexts. How would you like to see and how would you suggest the EU respond to what's happening in terms of these kinds of concerning provocations from Belarus to support democracy, to stand up for human rights?
Well, first of all, we are very attentive to issues that have to do with human rights, not just in our periphery. And Belarus is right on the European Union's periphery, but all over the world. Because the European Union, but us as a country, believe in a set of principles, values, and ideas, and democracy and human rights is on top of them. Having said that, the situation with Belarus is even worse because the Belarusian, if you may remember in the recent past, the Belarusian government, acting as a pirate, abducted a plane flying from Athens to Vilnius and took captives 2 persons that were traveling without their plane, and that for us is totally unacceptable. In our reading, this is an act of piracy, and no civilized state would be allowed to act that way. This is a way of acting in different eras. Also, Lithuania and the Baltic countries are allies and friends of ours. And we support them. We support them because we feel that injustice has been done to them. We support them because the Lukashenko regime is creating pressures by weaponizing migratory flows against Lithuania and the other Baltic countries in order to blackmail them, not to be vocal supporter of democracy and human rights in Belarus. And also, last but not least, we, Greece, have felt the same need for support from our European friends and partners when Turkey has weaponized migratory flows and tried to blackmail the European Union by pushing thousands of poor people who were looking for a better life towards our border back in March 2020. So there are many things that are at stake in Belarus today, not just the future of the Belarus society, which is by itself, it's of huge importance, but also the way the European Union reacts to efforts of blackmail, the way European Union reacts to issues having to do with democracy and human rights, and also the very fact that the European Union, it's a huge economic power, and it has to be able to influence positively the countries in its periphery.
To follow up on that, I was very surprised in a positive way to see how rapidly and quickly the EU was able to respond to the plane hijacking of Lukashenko by blocking the air flight for Belavia, Belarus's state-sponsored airline, and taking other measures as well. This is no small feat for a union of 27 members to be able to act so quickly. But I wonder, is there anything else that the EU can do? What would you like to see based on what you just said in terms of human rights and democracy? What else can we really do here?
Well, we should go on with the way of sanctions. We have imposed sanctions. We, European Union, that is the we have imposed sanctions on Belarus and certain persons, in particular in the Belarusian administration. This is the way forward. Unless they go back to the normal way of doing things, and of course, by that I mean elections at the end of the day. The Belarusian society has to express itself freely. I mean, it is clear to everybody that the last elections in Belarus was a joke, and I'm being polite. So, the European Union is absolutely entitled to enforce upon the present illegal Belarusian administration the need not only to protect human rights, but also to go back to democratic ways and allow the Belarusian people, the Belarusian society, to express its will on how that country will be governed. And of course, the European Union has one big weapon, and that is economic sanctions. Personalized economic sanctions.
Yes, exactly. Targeted sanctions,
yeah,
absolutely.
Because we have to be careful not to target the Belarusian society.
Exactly.
Not to hurt the very people we try to help.
And you mentioned Lithuania, of course, but the Baltic states more broadly, and to a certain extent Poland and Ukraine as well, which is not a NATO or EU member state, have done a lot to provide safe haven to some of these democracy activists, which I think has been a very positive development to see the entire continent, the entire EU, come together around this particular issue. Let me pan out a little bit to another complex regional security environment in Europe that I know you've thought a lot about, and you've already mentioned, which is the Western Balkans and the conversations that we're having today about the future of enlargement. Just recently, there was a summit held in Slovenia, which holds the presidency at the moment of the EU, to discuss potential next steps. It's a constant back and forth on the enlargement conversation, but how do you see the future of the Western Balkans, and how do you see the pragmatic next steps given some of the concerns and some of the regional security issues there?
Again, let me be frank and open. Greece very much believes what we call the Thessaloniki agenda. Back in early 2000, we thought that the best way forward, both for Europe, the European Union, and for the Balkan countries, is for the Balkan countries eventually to become members of the European Union. First of all, culturally, they belong to Europe. Geographically, they belong to Europe. But even if you see it purely strategically, the European Union cannot allow a black hole within Europe. This is not affordable in the long term. And I have to say, we, Greece, which, please don't get me wrong, we don't punch above our weight, we know for our size, but yet again, we have been very successful as far as the Eastern Balkans is concerned. Now that we're speaking, Bulgaria, Romania are members of the European Union, and we're very, very, very happy about it, and consider our own success as much as success of the Bulgarian and the Romanian societies. But that has to happen also for the Western Balkans. It has to happen for North Macedonia, it has to happen for Albania, and eventually for the other countries of the Western Balkans. And we very much advocate in their behalf. First of all, again, North Macedonia and Albania, and then the rest of the countries. We're not saying that these countries are ready to become full members, no. But what we say is that negotiations should start. For a very simple reason. We know from our own experience, unless there is a process, there is the ruling classes in those countries are not able to impose reforms. It has to go concurrently. And more than that now, both societies in Albania and in North Macedonia feel that they have been let down by the European Union, that things were promised and not delivered. And that is the worst that could happen in those societies. And you know, it would be absolutely wrong to believe that we can let this thing there and pick it up after 5 or 6 years when the public opinion in Western Europe will be more ready for it. It will not be the case. These countries would either go forward or go backwards. And we cannot afford to let them go backwards. That is our humble opinion. And we are ready to provide whatever we can, know-how, human capital in order to help those countries to advance, because there is a clear need for reform there that we appreciate. But a date for beginning of negotiations has to be given. That is our honest opinion. That's what we say to our member states, our friends member states. That's what we say to those countries as well.
So do you have renewed hope that this process will go along these lines you just outlined?
Well, it isn't. Let me be frank, it's not easy. It is not easy because, among others, of the electoral circle. We had elections in Germany. This is not a very popular idea. Even in Greece, there is a reaction. Well, that is true, but I mean, you cannot govern by the polls. Then politics is not statistics. France has presidential elections in 2022, so there are obstacles. But having said that, we always believe to reason. We believe that the European Union is a very proud example of what humanity can achieve, and having achieved the most difficult part, Germany and France are allies after fighting for centuries. Now, having achieved that, I think we can persuade European societies and European governments that Western Balkans belong to the European family. That we have to be optimistic in life and fight for what we think is right.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I still hold out hopes, of course, that eventually, we'll see the same path forward for countries like Ukraine and Georgia and others, but not yet. We have to get the Western Balkans done. We have to give them a path to enlargement before we can think about any other country on Europe's periphery. But I think it's been very clear that when countries do join Euro-Atlantic institutions, most notably the EU, but also NATO, that is how we have stability, that is how we have prosperity, and that is how we have a Europe whole, free, and at peace at the end of the day. So the Western Balkans, as you said, remain, unfortunately, this gray zone in Europe, and we can't let that go on. So I hope your optimism will be followed through by your partners and allies in Europe as well. And I think we still have a little bit of time to pan out to a more global perspective, because you did mention the Middle East already. And in recent years and months, Greece has taken a very active role in its diplomacy, particularly in the Middle East, engaging with allies, a lot of U.S. allies as well, of course. And I think you have a trip coming up to Libya in the weeks ahead as well, if I'm not mistaken. So clearly there's a strategic desire on the part of Greece to do more with its diplomatic efforts. But I'm hoping you can give me a bit of a sense of, what is the strategic desire behind all of this diplomacy in the Middle East? What is the end goal that you're trying to achieve?
Well, it is easy to explain it because it's very, very simple. What we're trying to do is achieve an understanding between countries that belong to international law of the sea, and rules-based society. This is what we're trying to achieve. And I have to say, it's easier said than done. This needs a very, very big effort. And it needs states that are willing to put resources where the beliefs are, come together, discuss issues, resolve problems, move forward. We have been very, very successful on resolving, for example, delimitation issues that we had with Italy on the sea between us and Italy. We have been very successful with Egypt. We have created a relation. We have been able also to agree with Albania on how we could dissolve delimitation issues on the sea between us. And also we have a defense agreement with the UAE. And we have a defense understanding with Saudi Arabia, trying to protect the oil resources of Saudi Arabia against actors that would like to undermine the production of oil and hurt the world economy. We're discussing with India. We will be discussing with Australia. We have a very close relation with Israel, with Jordan, with Iraq, with Kuwait, with Bahrain. Apart from Libya, I'm going to Oman next week. We would like to have an understanding in the region. And the understanding goes along the lines of international law, rule-based society, international law of the sea. And all the countries that see the future under that umbrella are very much welcome to join us. I have not mentioned Cyprus for obvious reasons. I mean, Cyprus is very close to us. Okay, that is needless to say. And under trilateral schemes, we're doing a lot with Cyprus. And we think that all this works miracles for the world order. On the other hand, there are countries that are not happy with that. But again, I would like to make it clear, this is not an alliance against anybody. It's an understanding of similar-minded states, and we believe that everybody that signs to the obvious is very much welcome to join.
Well, I think with those comments, you've actually just outlined what strategic autonomy looks like in practice. It's about building complementary alliances between different parts of the world in an effort to have greater cohesion between traditional allies and between democracies, first and foremost, at the end of the day. So I look forward to hearing more from you. I know you have a busy schedule. Really, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
It was my pleasure, and I hope we'll have a chance to meet again. And congratulations on a very successful trip to Washington, to your meetings with Secretary Blinken and many others, and the broader strategic partnership, and hopefully next time in Athens.
Oh, well, consider please yourself invited. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.